So good evening or afternoon, depending on where you're watching. Here is another World War II TV live show. I'm Paul Woodadge, and I'm joined by two guests. I mean, they're not just guests, they're friends of mine from the USA to talk about their forthcoming book. And in Gettysburg, which you may have heard of, it was some place in some war or something. I do recall, I've heard the name somewhere, is Erik Dorr in Gettysburg. Good afternoon, Erik. Erik, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Paul. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come on to World War II TV.
Well, we're happy to have you. And Jared Frederick, you are a bit further south, am I right? Yep.
To the west.
To the west.
In Altoona, Pennsylvania, near the center of the
Jack
state.
Coon, Ranger country, yeah.
There were 4 Rangers from my home area that participated in that assault. So a rather unique story.
And Jared is a history teacher and author and does other things and appears on podcasts and TV and stuff. So I've got a good little lineup tonight. And the book that they have coming out is on the screen behind me there. It is, you may recognize that gentleman there, Major Dick Winters, the erstwhile commander of E Company 506 during World War II, or one of their commanders, it should be said, and the collection of his artifacts and some of his correspondence during World War II. So, for a bit of background, we'll start with you, Jared, I think, because I've got to start with one of you. What's your background? Where did you come? How did you get involved in World War II history? And tell us a little bit about yourself for a minute or two before we get going with the book.
Well, there's a long answer to that short question. I'll condense it as best as I can. As is the case with, I think, a lot of World War II historians, there's a family connection. Both of my grandfathers fought in World War II. You can see one of the pictures up on the shelf behind me. One was in Europe, one was in the Pacific, one of them was a D-Day veteran. And shortly after both of them had passed away, when I was in elementary school, there was this realization that I had family members who had participated in this great endeavor. And one thing led to another, and I saw a number of history movies as well, on television when I was young. And where I really became addicted to history is when my parents took me to Gettysburg when I was 7 years old. And to make a long story short, 15 years later, I ended up being a park ranger there. I worked at the battlefield for a number of years, and then I transitioned to academia, and I currently teach U.S. history at Penn State Altoona.
Well, so you've certainly got the credibility there. So fantastic. So Erik, we'll move to you, and we both. I must stress I've met both these guys. Jared, I've met in Normandy, and Erik, I've met a few times and been over here several times. So Erik, you're in Gettysburg, and you're in your own museum. So tell us your background, how you ended up being a collector, and how you ended up with a museum in Gettysburg.
Well, it really started with my ancestors who owned part of the Gettysburg battlefield. It was the right flank of where Pickett's Charge was. They had a farm there. And when they would farm, they would plow up relics. And it's a good idea to get metal, lead, iron off of the farmed fields because it's not good for the crops. So all the farmers would have their kids follow the plows and pick up items. And so my great-great-grandfather found many of the items that were on that farm, farming it for decades. And they kept all those items. And most farmers in Gettysburg had a barn load of Civil War relics. And a lot of them had gone to museums over the years. But my family decided to keep the relics that they had found. And when I was a kid, and then at some point around the early 1900s, their land was made into part of the Gettysburg National Military Park, and they moved into town. But they brought the relics with them. And when I was a little kid, I would go to my grandfather's house in Gettysburg, and I would play with Civil War relics. And I became fascinated with artifacts. Different people, I always say, connect to history in different ways. Some people reenact, some people become tour guides, some people become teachers. My way of connecting with history was through the objects. I was very fascinated by the fact that these items that were at my grandfather's house were actually touched and used by Civil War soldiers. And then fast forward a little bit, when I was a kid, I became interested in other conflicts, such as World War I, because my grandfather was in World War I, and later World War II, because my other grandfather was in World War II. And I had a lot of neighbors that were in World War II. And I started collecting artifacts. They would give me patches, medals, things like that. And real quick, probably the first big acquisition that happened when I was a kid, I was in 4th grade, and the janitor at my elementary school was a World War II veteran. And I bought his war trophies in 4th grade. And I paid him $50, and it took me a whole year to pay him. But over that year, I gave him $5 here, $2 there, mowed lawns, did whatever I was doing at that time to make a little bit of money. And I paid him, and then I brought it home. And my dad didn't want it in the house because there was Nazi war trophies there. And my dad said, that's not coming in my house. And I had to explain to my father that I had those artifacts for the right reason. And he reluctantly let me keep some of those Iron Crosses and things that this American soldier had brought home. And from then on, I collected all my life. And about 11 years ago or 12 years ago, I got the idea that I need to house my collection. You know, I shouldn't just be hoarding this in my house. I need to start a museum, and what better place to do it than Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And I took the family home that we had on Baltimore Street, which is actually the route that Lincoln, went down to deliver the Gettysburg Address. And we converted the family home into a museum with keeping the historical, the historical architect of the building. So it's a small museum, but we have a lot of neat items. So that's my story in a nutshell of how I became a collector and the curator of the Gettysburg Museum of History.
And we can talk about some of the pieces you have in your museum, not just the World War II stuff as the show goes on. So, it's interesting how many people I meet who are historians who actually didn't get into World War II history or their period of history via school. I mean, I hated history at school. Normally it's something accidental. It's reenactment or collecting or neighbor. It's a common way, and then they go in, learn about it seriously. So we'll talk about the book. People are here to hear about the book and the Dick Winters collection. So you have the collection in your museum, Erik, of both his artifacts, uniform items, and the correspondence as well. But and Jared, you've published a couple of books. You've talked about World War II. How did you two meet to become working on? Was it when you were working at Gettysburg? Have you known each other a long time or comparatively short? One of you tell the story of how you two met.
Well, Jared doesn't remember, but I actually met him before I moved back to Gettysburg, and he was working in a bookstore. I'm sure it was him, and he had a 101st Airborne jump jacket on, and he was dressed as a reenactor. And I started talking to him, and I was like, wow, that guy's pretty sharp, and he was probably very young at that point. I don't remember how old he was. But when I moved back here about 12 or 13 years ago now, I guess it is, I started seeing Jared out on the battlefield, and he would give presentations, and he was working as a ranger. And I'll let Jared continue with that part.
Yeah, I worked at the park for about 5 years, 5 summers to be exact, and I found myself a frequent guest at the Gettysburg Museum of History because no matter how many hours I spent there, it seemed like I was discovering something new every time I entered its doors. And that still by and large remains true to this very day, something that I missed or overlooked on a previous visit or a new acquisition that he got. And I think that's one of the great allures of Erik's museum is that it's very far-reaching in its historical scope. And there are always new acquisitions coming into play. And so it was really my interest in his collection and my frequent conversations with him and our fairly frequent interactions and encounters on the battlefield that brought us together in this rather serendipitous way.
Well, I mean, to me, that's I haven't seen your book yet because it's not out yet. I hope I'm on the list for one of the promo copies when you get them. But there are books for militaria freaks and there are books about history. And I'm really hoping that your book caters to both of those avenues because I was a military collector myself. I was a reenactor myself, and I kind of like books about Denison smocks or cap badges, but also I accept the fact you don't learn your history from that. They are kind of the collector side of it. you get your history from your Peter Caddick Adams and your Alex Kershaw's and James Holland. So I'm hoping that your book kind of brings those things to get things together to explain history through artifacts, because museums I'm finding in Europe are going very much down they either stay a stuff museum, so it's just piles of guns and helmets, or they are the themed museums. And I kind of like both of them, but stuff is fine providing it has a story behind it. And I was in I don't mind having a go at the Imperial War Museum in London. Oh no, sorry, the National Army Museum in London. I went there for my first time in years, and they've redone it recently. My friend who I went to see it with, it's down in Chelsea, said, "You won't like it anymore, Paul. It used to be brilliant, but it's not any good anymore." And it's all via themes now. There's like men at war and emotional. Anyway, they've got Denison smock there on display, a British Airborne Paris smock, and it's got a big hole in the back and a hole in the front where something went, obviously a round went through it. But they're not telling that story. They're just using it as an example of a Denison smock. Now, to me, if you've got a smock that's clearly seen action, that's the story I want to read about. That's what I want to know about. Who did that guy die? And so it seems to me they're using artifacts to just be an example of an artifact. Now, I'm sure, Erik, a lot of the stuff in your museum is, in some sense, is inherently boring in that it's a button, or it's a badge, or it's a book, but it's the fact that button isn't inherently boring because it's the button that was worn by this guy that has the damage on it there that was worn then. It's the story that makes the items interesting. Obviously, they have got value, but give me an example of something you've got that is just completely common, but it's the story that sets it apart.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, since you referenced the British paratrooper jacket with a bullet hole in it, is, we have several World War II examples too, but battle damaged items are very, very interesting to visitors because it does exactly what you just said. It tells a story. And one of my favorites is, I have a belt buckle from the Civil War, actually, that stopped a bullet. And the guy who wore that belt buckle was from Gettysburg, and he was from the famous Company K, 1st Pennsylvania Reserves, who actually fought on our battlefield. But the great thing about it is it has a letter with it to his wife saying that a ball struck me in the waist, but thank God it hit my plate, for if it had not, I'm paraphrasing here, it would have gone through my bowels, and I would this day be in the ground. And I mean, it's just such a wild piece because the belt buckle obviously has a big hole in it, and but with that letter home to his wife, it just makes it so interesting. And we have a couple World War II helmets in this room actually with bullet holes, and we have a couple struck plates. But battle damaged items, I think, are some of the most interesting to visitors because they definitely tell a story. And when you actually have this story, not just a relic that came out of the ground, but in the case with the belt buckle I was just talking about, you have the letter to his wife explaining exactly what happened from the soldier. Really makes it interesting.
Which leads in very nicely to Major Dick Winters, because pretty much everybody watching this and everybody in the civil life, there are probably people in tribes in darkest Peru that have not heard of anybody else. They've heard of Dick Winters. He has become now one of those people everybody in the world has heard of. So, if you're trying to communicate the events of 76 years ago, 75 years ago, World War II, to do it through the artifacts of someone everybody knows, or at least they think they know, is a way of connecting it to people. So Jared, as the teacher here amongst us, that must be the way that when you're teaching to your classes, connecting the people who are in the audience with history, making them feel that it's their history, is essential for getting it into head. If it sounds to be just something that happened in the past to other people, there's no connection. So that when you got involved in this cataloging and of the Dick Winters collection, it must have been something that you thought of in educational terms of how useful that could be.
Absolutely, there is an inherent academic value to looking at this sort of a primary source, and as you just alluded to, so many people have heard of Dick Winters, and we think we know his story. And I'll put it to you this way. The best way that I can describe it from a personal perspective is that before I started researching with this project, when I thought of Dick Winters, Damian Lewis was the person who came to mind. I envisioned how he was portrayed in the series Band of Brothers. That has changed, though, completely. I no longer picture Damian Lewis right off the bat, I think of Dick Winters as who he really was. And his letters are so compelling, so revealing. They serve as these rich glimpses into the past. And of course, many members of Easy Company wrote memoirs, years later. But, much like I found with newspaper accounts in my previous book on D-Day, there's a sense of immediacy and place and urgency with items written in the moment rather than books written 50, 60, 70 years later that really allow for this immersive opportunity that we otherwise might not get in history books. And so whether it be primary sources like letters or artifacts, and I try to do this in the classroom very often. I like to take in artifacts into the classroom and allow students to pass them around and examine them. And that is so much more meaningful to them than me just showing a picture of it, or something along those lines. And so there's it was almost this surreal experience for me. And I jumped at the opportunity when Erik presented it to me, and it's really been an honor to be doing this because I watched Band of Brothers in high school, and 15 years ago I never would have envisioned myself having the opportunity to interact with these artifacts and correspondence in the manner that I have. And as you suggested earlier as well, there's a fine line in catering to specific audiences, the kind of widespread appeal versus the more specific audience that's really interested in military.
Geeky is the word you're looking for, I think, isn't it? Geeky.
Fair enough. And and I come from a background of historical interpretation. When I was a park ranger at Gettysburg, I like to think that I learned how to distill complex and important and meaningful topics in a way that could be understood by the broad numbers of masses who were on my tours. Because, there would be military officers on my tours, but at the same time, there would be 5-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And how do you balance between the two of those? And so I had that sort of issue in mind as we were writing this book, because what we did as a sort of connective tissue between the letters is that we offered historical context. And I think the real value in this book that sets it apart from other Dick Winters books is that we bring a lot of these accounts, these memoirs, into conversation with each other, with Dick's letters really kind of serving as the spine of it all. And so it's not merely about Dick Winters, it's also about the World War II experience of both he, his comrades, and also the people that he knew back home. And so that home front perspective, particularly his correspondence with the other main protagonist in our book, a naval reservist in the waves named Dieta Allman, who gets little reference, in a lot of, Dick Winters conversations. It was revealed to us just how important of a friend she was in the letters that they wrote back and forth to each other during the war.
I mean, let's make it clear for the viewers here that we're in no way suggesting that Dick Winters is any more fantastic than all the other 235 Distinguished Service Cross and Navy Cross recipients on D-Day alone, for example, and he was one of them. So there's 234 other individuals, and I've got Phil Nordyke's book that lists all those people, some of whom they don't even have a photo, they don't know who these people were, they don't even have the citations existing anymore. So what is of value is the fact that Dick wrote down his experiences. He talked about it then. He analyzed them later. We'll go into, Erik, what the collection actually consists of later on. But he looked at it. He made notes. He read widely. He read other World War II authors. He read, obviously he encountered Stephen Ambrose, but he read other people. So he was in a position to be able to comment about the war from someone who had both A, participated in it, B, survived it, and C, wanted to talk about it and understand where it sat in his life. And it's that makes it interesting. As a survivor of the war, the fact he was in E Company 506 that became a TV show is in some ways irrelevant to the story, although of course it does help make the book popular because everybody knows Band of Brothers. So Erik, I think you've been sitting there, Pay. Let's bring you in for a bit, because there's quite a long and complicated story about how the collection ended up coming together. I mean, both the artifacts and the letters. And for the benefit of those watching, how did it all end up? Perhaps the shorter version. I mean, the long version might need to be broken into several shows, but perhaps the potted version of how the collection came together and to be in your possession.
Well, you know, and there's definitely a long story, and I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible, but there's also a lot of misinformation out there. You know, sometimes you read stuff on the internet, and you know, you read stuff in forums that are written by people who have no clue, you know, really. So what really happened with Winter's items was he had a lot of artifacts. He had a lot of German war trophies, actually. And not too long after the book came out, he decided to sell his German war trophies, and that consisted of about 25 guns. He brought home and mailed home a whole bunch of German guns. Now, I don't have gloves on, but I put these pictures in plastic, so don't yell at me. So here's a couple of photos of the guns. There's some pistols here. I don't know how well you can see that.
We can see that. Just hold it for a second, a bit longer. Just hold it so we get. Wow. Mausers, Lugers,
Yeah, there was a bunch of pistols and 4 or 5 rifles, and then here's another shot of his American uniforms, which we now have some of. So what he did was he went to a military collector's show near Pittsburgh not too long after the book came out, and he was with his best friend and who collects military items, and he wanted to sell his German items. He wanted to sell the rifles, the pistols, and he also had a German Fallschirmjäger smock and a pair of gloves and a few other German items. And he enlisted the help of a former Green Beret who was also an officer that he connected with. And it turned out he wasn't able to do it. So he gave it to the project of liquidating Major Winter's war trophies to another Green Beret. And he handled the sale of all those weapons. And they're now dispersed amongst collectors all over the country. And I have one of the rifles now, which I'll show you later when I glove up here, which is a G43 sniper rifle, really excellent gun. But he sold all those items. And then a famous collector in Belgium named Michel Dutrez, who you may know is from the D-Day experience, bought some of his uniforms. He went to visit with him, and he said, you know, I can't buy your pistols because I can't transfer them to Europe, but I'd like to buy some of your items. So Michel Dutrez bought some of his items, and including a jump jacket, an M43 jacket, which is now behind me, and a bunch of the uniforms and his combat equipment. And you can see those items today, the Normandy related items at the D-Day Experience Museum, and it's a great display. Then he sold a few other items to another dealer, the smock and a couple other, I believe the gloves, to another military dealer who was a friend of his. And then a while later, after the series came out, well, wait, let me back up. In between the time the book came out and the series came out, he also got the letters that we're now using in the book from Dieta. She had contacted him, and she had saved all these letters from World War II. And so she gave them back to Major Winters. And so he had gotten those, I believe, in sometime in the 90s. And so after the series came out, Major Winters had a real sense of how important his legacy is going to be. And so he decided to figure out where these items are going to go. So one of the things that was really important to Major Winters was the documents and the files. And what had happened was, when they were writing the book Band of Brothers, Winters sent all kinds of letters, documents, photographs, and other material to Stephen Ambrose to use. And Ambrose used those materials for the book, and then he mailed them all back to Major Winters. And he had boxes and boxes and boxes of documents, correspondence, letters from the other men, photos from the other men. And so he decided to put those together into a series of files. And his wife, Mrs. Winters, worked at a library, and she helped him with that. And she was a great organizer. And what they did was they made a file for each man. Take, for instance, there's a Bill Garnier file, and they took all the correspondence between Winters and Ambrose and put it into that file, and anything that was related to him, and maybe a few photos. And they made several sets of these files, and a set of them went to each of his biographers, one of his close friends, and the Carlisle War College got a set as well. And the biggest amount of them went to the official Easy Company historian who was appointed by Major Winters. And he had a lot of those items for a long time. And then he ended up selling them because of some issues. And they went to a doctor in Tennessee with the understanding that they would go into a museum, because Winters wanted his items, I believe, in an institution or a museum, but he didn't want it to go in a back room somewhere, especially his uniforms and stuff. So some of the key uniforms also went to that historian. And all this stuff ended up with this doctor in Tennessee who was on the board of, I believe it was a Tennessee State Museum. And they did go on display there temporarily. And then a few years back, I made contact with this doctor, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, if I could get these items in Gettysburg, they would be perfect, because my thought was Gettysburg is visited all the time. We get 1 million+ people here every year. Winters is from Pennsylvania. He's from this general area. He lived not far from Gettysburg. And I thought, what a great collection to get, because I was very interested in World War II. And I'd already had a pretty decent World War II Airborne collection. And, you know, I really wanted Winters stuff also for the wow factor. You know, I mean, we have famous uniforms in here. You know, we have Audie Murphy's uniform. We have James Gavin's uniform. I mean, we have a lot of famous uniforms in here. But I'll tell you, the one that gets the most attention, or the series of uniforms that gets the most attention, is Winters, because, you know, it's sad but true. You know, a lot of these other guys just are not that well known. I mean, even Audie Murphy. You know, you ask somebody who comes in here who's under 55 or 50 who Audie Murphy is, sadly, they don't know. It is sad. But almost everybody knows who Winters is, because Band of Brothers was fairly recent. It was so big and everything. So it really gets a lot of attention. It gets people interested in it. And, you know, after we got these items, I decided to try to track down some of the other items. And one of the factors of getting this stuff was, you know, the doctor in Tennessee wanted it to go to an institution. And his idea was that someone would raise money to do that. And so I was the one that raised the money to do it and brought it here. Actually, one of my friends bankrolled it, and then I paid him back because it was a staggering amount of money. But I'm happy I did it. And I was a little hesitant at first because of the cost involved. And the extra nudge that I got, and I hope this isn't taking up too much of our time here, but
no, it's all fascinating stuff, Eric. You keep going.
Yeah, it's important to know where the stuff came from. So I was kind of on the fence, because I was thinking, this is a lot of money from the museum budget and out of my pocket, really, enough to make things a little scary here. So the extra nudge I got, and I got to give a big shout out to him, was Bill Shea, the collector who had a couple of Winters items that he had bought directly from Winters. He said, Eric, you got to do it. He goes, this is an opportunity for your museum of a lifetime. He goes, you'll never regret doing it. And I'll tell you what, if you decide to create an exhibit around Major Winters, I will loan you my items too. And so that was the extra nudge I need. I was like, geez, I'm going to get Shea's items too. You know, he has the overcoat. He has a couple other items, the binoculars. I mean, you know, he has some great stuff. And I slowly but surely, I started putting the items together. And of course, then Dutrez, I told you, had a bunch of items. And Michel Dutrez sold his museum in La Glace. You know, he had the one in Normandy and he had the one in Belgium. And I started working on him about the items that were in the Belgian museum, because, you know, I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'll just put them away because I'm not going to interpret anything except for Normandy at D-Day experience. And I said, well, why don't you sell them to me? You know, I'll put them on display, you know, and so it took a while and some more money out of my pocket, but I bought the 43 jacket that's behind me that he wore in Holland and throughout the war. And then I also bought his B-15 jacket that he wore in Bastogne. And more recently, I bought a shirt and a pair of pants. And I think there's some pictures of him wearing that up at the Obersalzberg at the end of the war, which I'm going to do another mannequin with that setup too. So I bought several items from Michel. And then the other thing that happened was other Easy Company people, meaning family members, started to contact me, and they found out that I was not only exhibiting winter stuff, that I was buying items. And also in this time, I also became a not-for-profit. Our museum, there's a private part, which is the collection I own, but we're also a not-for-profit. So I can get donations as well. And people in the USA, you can get tax write-offs for that. So we're a charitable organization and we can get that as well. So other Easy Company people who had items, meaning family members, started to give us items, you know. So we got stuff from Ron Spears, we got stuff from Babe Heffron, and a couple other key players. And so the collection started to grow. And now it is developed into, you know, the biggest collection of Easy Company artifacts in the world. I mean, you know, it's incredible to me, you know, how quickly it grew and how amazing it is, because, you know, I've always been a fan of it as well, you know. So but the thing, getting back to the letters, is when I got the files, there was a couple files missing, so I was able to get those back and put it together. And, you know, the other sets of files are just copies, whereas the ones I have the copies that are very equal to what the War College in Carlisle has, but we also have original documents too. A lot of my stuff is the original stuff, you know. And for example, like in the files, you'll have the roster, but then this is the original roster that was made in May of 1944, right before D-Day. You know, so we have not just the copies, but the original stuff. Like here's Winter's jump certificate signed by Sink. You know, I mean, that's the original one. Wow. It's not a copy. There's a lot of original documents, and there's also photographs too. You know, we got all his photo albums and all the stuff that was sent to Ambrose and sent back. And, you know, and that's a mix of originals and copies, some copies that were sent by some of the men. But the thing that really kind of, you know, that really blew me away really was these letters. You know, I'd seen the letters referenced in some of the other biographies on Dick Winters that came out after Band of Brothers. Yep. But to read them, you know, because when you read Winters' writing, and it's very much the, you know, the officer class, it's very businesslike. It's not a lot of emotion. It's, you know, it's business, you know, really military business. And so when I started reading these letters, I was like, this is amazing. I mean, this is a whole other side of someone I have studied a lot. And I was blown away. And I thought, my gosh, you know, these, I need to do something with these, you know, I need to put them online or do something with them. And, you know, getting back to that, Winters also had Mrs. Winters transcribe all the letters and put them into context, where he wrote some notes besides some of the letters. And then at the beginning, he put them into a folder, and he put almost like a permission slip at the beginning saying, these are for people who want to know a little bit more. And I can't remember the exact wording. Maybe Jared can help me in a minute, but, or I can get it out here actually. But he gave 5 of these to key historians. And I believe what he wanted to do was have them come out at some point, maybe later. I really think it was a nugget he left out there for people. He gave 5 copies plus the ones that went to some of his family members and some of the Navy Wave Dietta's family. But he wrote it in a way that made me think that he wanted these published at some point. And my initial idea was just to publish them as is, because he adds context to them as well. But then we had a visit from a mutual friend of ours, Paul, James Holland. He came here a couple of years ago to access Dick's files to do his Normandy 44 book. He wrote about Brecourt and some other stuff. And I gave him full access to the files. And I showed him these things, and he was like, my God, these are brilliant, you know? And he says, you got to do something with these. And I said, yeah. And so he said, but if you publish them, you got to add context to it. You know, like, what if somebody picks up the book and doesn't really know who Winters is, you know? And so that's where I decided to bring in Jared, because I know Jared really loves Winters. We talk about him all the time, and he's very passionate. I like his other work. And I thought this would be a great project for Jared. And I'm so glad we teamed up, because I think the results are pretty fantastic. Sorry to be long-winded on that, but
no. The comments on YouTube, people are finding it fascinating. And I mean, to kind of summarize what you said, then we'll bring Jared in. It seems to me, and I know I've got my whole Easy Company bookshelf, because I knew Bill and Dave and all those guys like you did, and there's the existing books are the major Winters archives. This is the Dick. That's the understanding I'm making, is that these are Dick writing as a human being from Pennsylvania about as just a human being in experiencing the war, as opposed to Major Winters doing his archives as an officer who served in the 506. Is that how you would break it down, Jared, in a sort of a simple way?
Yeah,
we're gonna learn about Dick, the person, from this book.
Indeed, and it's a very interesting juxtaposition, because we have some of his reports and some of his more formal writings in the book as well. And I think when you see that sort of correspondence side by side with one another, we see the two sides of him that you just suggested.
Yeah.
And he writes in the third person often when he, writes his formal after action reports and such. But with his letters to Dieta, this naval wave, there's a degree of informality that we don't often see elsewhere, and we see that this whole other human perspective, because in the series he is constantly presented as this stalwart figure who is all-knowing, and he is always the crutch of strength, which he was for his men. And what we see in Band of Brothers is how his men perceived him, not necessarily how he perceived himself. And in his letters, he has moments of doubt. He makes fun of himself. And despite having sublime confidence in his abilities as a combat leader, it was incredible to see the amount of inner fortitude that he had in these letters. But at the same time, and I quote him here, he acknowledges that he feels very much at ease and in his place on the battlefield. But he said, in regard to social activities and socializing or going out to a dance, he described himself as a Class A flop. And it says a lot, that to an extent, he felt more comfortable leading men in the trenches than what he did on a dance floor back when he was in college. And it speaks to his personal attitude. It speaks to how he perceived himself. And that's a perspective that we don't often see, certainly not in the Hollywood version.
Well, and that just to me makes it all the more fascinating, because I was engaged in a Twitter debate, a chat today about people. It was about Montgomery, in fact, General Montgomery. About we have to speculate a lot of what he was thinking, because he didn't share those thoughts. He only shared the field marshal's ideas of things, and there's a part of our understanding of him that we're missing, because he never communicated that. And we've kind of been presented the Major Winters as the officer who wrote his reports, but we haven't got to see the person behind it. It's like, Jared, if we were to judge you in 30 years' time by your correspondence with the educational authorities, we get a very different picture if we judged you by how you interacted with the parents of kids at parents' evenings. It's the whole package of you we want to know, not just the bureaucratic details. And we have to remember that when people are writing up morning reports and after action reports, these are for clerks. These are to be filed away. They're not there necessarily to explain, oh, by the way, I was terrified when I led that men over that hill towards that German position. It's just a report. We moved in, we lost 6, we gained this. So I think, I'm looking forward to reading the book already. So, well, I was before I started the show. So, give us an example of something, just brief. We don't want to give the book away, but Jared, something when you were reading the letters, were there moments, I mean, the dancing thing is, but moments you went, wow, that gives me insight now. Like you were saying a minute ago, you're now seeing Dick, not Damian Lewis. Is there a particular moment that you kind of, wow, that one did it?
Wow. I think one of the most revealing things that we find in the letters and in the book is that a lot of our story takes us to the days before Easy Company, and it also takes us to their post-war occupation of Germany. The series starts at Camp Toccoa, but Winters was in military service for months and months and months before that. And so we get this perspective of his life at home, his early days in the military at Camp Croft in South Carolina. And it was while he was stationed there that he meets this friend of his, Dieta Allman. And you really see the long-term evolution of him as a leader, because this is a guy who went from being a private to a major in 3 years. There are not many people in any army of the Second World War who make such a dramatic jump in rank. And so you get a sense of his inner workings, how he methodically planned out how he would rise from an enlisted man to an officer. And he realized the value of education as well. And how much he valued training manuals, tutorials, and other books. He was an incredibly well-read individual, as we suggested earlier. And he considered this to be the building block of his rise to the officer class. And, he writes in some of his letters, other people were going out to party, to drink, and of course he didn't drink. And there were times where he opted instead to just stay on base for the weekend, and he would read training manuals. And Erik has, the Infantry Journal, one of those manuals in his collections, which I think is my favorite Dick Winters artifact.
Wow.
Because for as simple as it is, that book is kind of the bedrock of his being. And, to allude to another point earlier, in the realm of popular culture, but also tying in with education, in the introduction to our book, we draw the comparison. Dick Winters is a lot like Joshua Chamberlain, the officer of the Civil War who gained a lot of fame for his actions at Gettysburg. And even though they came from different professional backgrounds, academic and agricultural, respectively speaking, there was so much in common with these two men. They had mothers who were pacifists. They grew up with that sort of pacifist mindset. The value of learning was instilled in them at a young age. And despite the fact that neither of them had formal military education, both of them sought to serve their country at their two greatest, hours of crisis, the American Civil War and the Second World War. And they proved themselves with supreme battlefield gallantry. And that could be said for many, many officers of both of those wars. But what makes Chamberlain and Winters unique is that in the decades that followed, they religiously kept record of their experiences. They wrote about it, they created files, they kept in touch with their comrades through reunions and letter writing. They wrote these sublime memoirs, which were widely read, which were in then turn utilized by highly popular authors for incredibly successful movies.
Yeah.
And so I like to think of Dick Winters as the Joshua Chamberlain of World War II, or vice versa. And because I think they have a lot in common in that regard. And that was a long answer to your question.
No, I'm going to go and move my Joshua Chamberlain book beside my Dick Winters book when you're finished.
There you go.
I can see the connection completely. And
that is what hit me when I started reading his letters, his growth, and also how important he is from the perspective of legacy and how Americans in particular perceive the greatest generation. He is symbolic of that generation, just like Chamberlain is for the Civil War generation.
Yeah, and we have to accept that. I mean, with my World War II TV, I'm trying not to do too much Easy Company stuff because I don't want to be seen to be, oh, he's just doing Easy Company stuff. You know, I had George Laz on sharing some audio files, the guys, a few weeks ago, and now there's you. Now leave it for a bit because there's plenty of stuff about Easy Company out there. I think this is genuinely interesting enough as a historical document and a collection outside of Easy Company to warrant a show about it. I'm not, it's not another Band of Brothers fan thing, although I have been guilty of doing some of them myself. But back to the show, not that we could talk about the show. Winters probably has the least of a character journey during the 10 episodes of most of the characters. If you think of the journey Malarkey goes on or Compton, for example. I mean, Winters seems to be very competent and good at the beginning, and he seems to be very competent and good at the end. You don't really see the journey. So I'm fascinated that the letters will give an insight to a guy who isn't quite as confident behind the scenes. I mean, he is confident, but he's also like anybody who's a human being. I get nervous before these shows because you think, oh God, am I going to get it all wrong again? And you know, it's good to be nervous. So I can't wait. So Erik, let's bring it back to some of the artifacts again beyond the letters. I mean, you've got I know people watching are going to see some stuff. So we've obviously got the M43 there behind us. Mean, you've got the DSC, haven't you? Which is probably one of the prized possessions. If I just may
add to something that Jared said,
of course,
you know, and this is going to be a plug or maybe a incentive to get the book, is I think one of the most revealing things about these letters when you read them back to back is that once Winters tastes combat, how much he changes and his demeanor changes in his letter writing. He becomes much more cynical. He becomes a different person. And I mean, it's really interesting to watch that develop as he goes through more combat, you know, and I think that is what got me with these letters. I was like, wow, you know, you can tell he's seen the elephant, as they say, and his complete attitude changes. And I just thought that was really interesting. But I just want to hold up Infantry in Battle. This is Jared's favorite piece in the collection.
Oh,
and it's really neat because when you go through it, Winters throughout the book, like he would put underlined sentences and things like that. And when you really read the underlined parts, it really, you know, goes to, you know, mostly like small unit tactics and stuff like that. And it's really revealing. And then he also wrote in here where he purchased that book. I don't know if you can see that.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's his inscription.
Even early on, he dutifully cataloged things, and that inscription inside the infantry journal is so emblematic of that.
Yeah. And just for people watching, one of the things that bugs me as a Normandy tour guide is this idea that what he did at Brecourt Manor was special, air quotes, in that it was straight out of the manuals. I mean, it is absolutely what you should do. There's nothing revolutionary. I mean, he did it really well. I'm not criticizing him, but it wasn't something what Spears did in Foy. That's kind of out there. That's that's out of his, but Dick Winters played it safe. He played it by the manuals, and I'm saying that as a compliment. It is the fact that he went into combat having learned his trade. And you don't, on your first day of combat on June the 6th, 1944, try something special. You wait till you've done it a bit before you start trying something special. So I'm always jumping and people say, oh, what he did at Breckel was amazing. No, it was what it was, but it was absolutely what I've been taught to do. I mean, and that's a point I wanted to make there. And genuinely what he did, I think, was pretty routine. It was the way you should do it. Because he's steady. He's, if you want to talk about easy company commanders, I've never been in the military. I would happily go to war under Dick Winters, and I'd happily go to war under Ron Spears, excepting they are completely different in how they go about things. But I'd be happy under each of their command, but they are completely different. So, I wanted to make that point there. So, well, we got lots of stuff to talk about. Someone said, and I think the answer is no. Someone said, do the letters go up to his service in the Korea War era? And I guess they don't, do they?
The answer is no. He stopped corresponding with her when he got home.
And got married as well, I guess. Was that?
Yeah. Well, that was a little bit later, but
yeah.
I mean, the letters stopped. I believe, Jared, correct me if I'm wrong, December of 45?
Yeah, right around Christmas of 1945 is when they stopped their written correspondence at that time. Now, they had met once after the war to catch up with each other. But after both of them started families, they fell out of touch. And it was not until the book Band of Brothers came out that Dieta embarked on a quest to rediscover her old pen pal. And so in 1995, almost exactly 50 years later, the two of them reconnected and reignited their friendship in their final years. It's a beautiful story.
Wow. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like the letters, because they were just pen pals, they were just friends. It's not like he's writing to a girlfriend that he's trying to impress her with all the stuff he's done that way. I killed 15 Germans last week. There's no falseness to it. I have read some letters by World War II veterans where they are trying to impress their girl back, and you think, I don't think he did half of the stuff he's saying here, but he's not trying to impress her. So he's just telling her how he feels because they're pen pals. They're just expressing very honestly with each other. I mean,
that is it. In my opinion, a lot of what's going on, and there's definitely maybe a romantic connection with her. Maybe I think maybe in the beginning he thought about it, but there's a point in the letters where he says that there's not going to be romance here. They're simply really good friends and pen pals, and I thought that was very interesting too, because they started out on dates and stuff, and they went horseback riding, and together and stuff when they were still stateside. So, but I guess I should start showing a few of these artifacts.
Yeah, I think it's the time for show and tell time now, I think.
Yeah. It's not just the letters. We do have a color section of some photos and documents, and this is the famous D-Day diary with the hand-drawn placement of the guns. We were just talking about Breakhorse.
Yeah.
And Paul, you and I have talked about those guns placement before, and I think it goes back and forth of which way one of those cannons was pointed. But anyway,
I'm back to L shape now. I started L shape. I went to line of 4. I'm back on L shape now. Unless I could get a time machine and go back and check, I'll never know for certain. But I am pretty much now L shape. I've wavered over the years, but I mean, those documents just extraordinary for a history. I mean, Jared, you must have been, a kid in the candy store when you saw this stuff.
Oh, indeed, that's understating it.
So I think there's an amazing exhibit there. So I mean, I think apart from the images you've shown on Facebook, that is the closest I've ever got to seeing the Distinguished Service Cross there, which is just incredible. Is there a backstory about the fact, Eric, you'll be able to correct me, that he hadn't opened the envelope it came in for years and years? It was just, it wasn't on display in his house, was it? It was just in a drawer. Is there something like that I've got from someone?
Well, I mean, I think he got that one in that ceremony that we were talking about earlier. And then he mailed it home, I believe. And that's supposedly the one that was given to him. Now, I don't know about an envelope because that one's actually in a box, you know.
Yeah,
so
but I saw someone told me years ago that it was just sitting in a drawer and he didn't have it on display or anything. I mean, which makes complete sense. He's not the kind of person to say, look at my medal on the wall there. And it was just the box that was in an envelope in his bedside cabinet or something is something I heard. But
yeah, and you know, another area that has some of his items, of course, is the Hershey Dairy Historical Society. They have a recreation of his office, and there they have a shadow box with some of his medals, but I believe those are post-war medals that someone made for him that he actually did display in his office. So they do have some of the items from his office there, but it's mostly post-war items. But they do have that really fantastic, I believe it's a wartime guidon from Easy Company in there.
wow,
so they, again, there's another institution where he had some of his items go to. So, you know, they're dispersed throughout a few places. But here's something I wanted to show. This is one of my favorites. This is his officer's ID card. And he had that laminated. And on the back here, he crossed out his rank where he kind of went up the rank a little bit.
Oh, right. Lovely.
Started as lieutenant, and then, you know, he crossed out some stuff and put other ranks as he went up. And here's his next of kin dog tag, which had, you know, he would have worn early on. And then a lot of guys for D-Day were issued the one with less information does not next of kin, and these are supposedly the ones he wore in combat. And that way, you know, if you're captured, the Germans don't have your mother's name and stuff like that. It's better, I guess, for certain reasons. And so here's also you know, I mentioned about him selling the German war trophies, which involved the pistols, and he kept one German pistol past that sale because they show it in Band of Brothers, the series, when they do the interviews, and he talks about he got it from a German commander. He kept that one, and he also kept this one, which was his 45 that he had in training. He did not have this on D-Day. He left it behind because he got a new one, a brand new. This is a very early 1911. It's very early serial numbers, very worn. But he lost the new one on D-Day along with his other equipment. And so this one he had on, you know, mostly through training, but then later on in the war, he went back to his old trusty 1911, which is a great piece.
Wow.
And I mentioned earlier about the Fallschirmjäger gloves that he captured at Carentan along with a smock. But here are the Fallschirmjäger gloves. I was able to get those. Another collector had these. And I was able to add these to the collection fairly recently, and I'm going to be getting the smock sometime this year. Here's a picture of Major Winters later in life wearing
with the
that
gloves. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let's see what else. We talk about the Easy Company mascot in the book a little bit. This is Draftee. And this was
not
a
actually
dog.
him.
Yeah, I'm guessed that, Jared. Wow.
This is the display in the museum, but this is the little I guess you'd call it like a little mascot uniform that was made for Draftee. And people who know the story of Easy Company know that Draftee started following them when they did the march from to Atlanta. And
and isn't he pictured on DeWitt Lowry's back in the march or someone? One of them is carrying. I think it's Lowry.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Yep. And so
wow.
This picture was in the newspaper, and it went around to I think a few newspapers actually. And some lady made this for this this cool little, I don't even know what you would really call it, a mascot uniform for the dog.
Yeah.
And DeWitt Lowry ended up with this, and we got that very recently from the family of DeWitt Lowry, which I think is a really neat item.
That's weirdly obscure and obscurely weird, but I love it. Yeah, no, fantastic. Yeah. But that's the Easy Company item that no one else is going to have, isn't it? That's you've got the dog coat though. Yeah. I can see a line of someone doing Easy Company. Someone's watching this and they're going to start. It'll be on eBay next week. So I'm going to be reproducing Easy Company dog coats.
That's right. So I told you, like, the photo albums that we have are a combination of originals, and I have a bunch of those I can hold up, but it's kind of hard to do that on the camera. But
Jared's got a couple of things he can share with us, haven't you, Jared? If you want to, Jared's the technology one. If you want to share some images, you're welcome to, Jared.
Yeah,
Jared, can you
put
up the famous picture from Easy Company, and then I'll show the negative of it?
Yeah, sure. The one in Saint-Marie-du-Mont?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're all familiar with that photograph. It's probably one of the most famous photographs. And of course, it was used on the cover of Band of Brothers. And it was, there we go.
Yeah,
very
wonderful.
So, that's probably the most famous Easy Company photo, just because, it was used on the cover of Band of Brothers, and it was from Forrest Goose collection. And we have some of Forrest Goose negatives. Now, Michel Dutrez has most of them, but some of the ones that were used by Ambrose ended up going to Ambrose, and then they were sent back to Dick Winters. And those were in the form of negatives. And if you can come back to me, I'll show you. This is the actual negative of that photo that was in the camera. And so we have, I guess, 9 or 10 of the originals, and then Michel Dutrez has the rest of them that he bought directly from Forrest Goose. And then, Jared, can you show the picture of Bill Garnier and James Deal, the color picture?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Bear with me for a moment.
Professional team today.
Yeah, so we have the negatives of those that were made later on for some magazine articles and stuff, but we do have one of the real significant originals in the form of a 1940s Kodak Chrome, which was the early color photography, I guess more commonly known by most people as a slide. But it's a very famous picture. This is the slide while Jared gets it together. I don't know. Wow. You probably can't see it real good, but that's the original. And then Jared's going to bring up the picture.
There we go.
There it is. Beautiful color.
Detail.
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at the original and you put it in a slide projector, handheld one, I mean, the color is just amazing. And it's great that it's held that color, because sometimes those things fade over time, and it's just a gorgeous picture. And like I said, there's a lot of original pictures. We have a lot of the original Al Krotchka photos that Dick Winters had.
Oh, right, yeah, because he bought the album, didn't he? And for those watching, Al Krotchka was one of the 506 photographers. And at the end of the war, I think it's in the show, isn't it? They mentioned the fact Dick acquired all those photos. And
yeah, like I believe
traded
this
for
is one of
Lugers.
them. Yes. And this one has some of Dick Winters' writing on the back, and then there's also here's one from Camp Croft, one of the real early ones. We have a whole album of these, probably about 100 photographs, and most of them have not been seen. We published a few of them in this book, and they're just amazing. I mean, Dick Winters was really into physical fitness, and he writes about that in some of his letters. I thought that was really interesting too. I'm going to grab something here. Sorry to go off camera, but it kind of fell over. One of the things that we're doing with the book is, Brad Freeman from Easy Company wrote the foreword to the book. He wanted to do it. I asked him about it. I'm pretty good friends with him, and he said, I'd really like to do that. So we sat down with him and helped him do that, and he wrote the foreword. But a lot of people have asked us, can we get one signed by Brad? And so what we did was we made these cards. They're almost like real thick baseball cards. Yep. And they're two-sided, and we're going to do these as almost like book plates. So We're going to do a limited amount of these, and then it has a piece of genuine D-Day parachute attached to it from our collection that was actually used on D-Day, and then it's signed by Brad. And we're going to number them up here, and then we'll have the back with a little information about it and everything. So we're going to do a limited amount of these, and they'll only be available from my website, GettysburgMuseumofHistory.com. after the book comes out. And of course, Jared will have some too if he does some speaking engagements. But one of the things I wanted to bring out was this baby right here. This is the G43 sniper rifle. I don't know how well you can see it.
We can see that very well, yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the rifles he brought home. You know, it was mostly pistols, but there were several rifles as well. And this thing, you know, this is a very late war weapon. They came out right at the end, you know, and so I believe this didn't see a lot of action. It's in beautiful condition. And I mean, the stock has a compartment in it. It still had the manual in there and the cleaning kit, which you rarely see.
Superb.
And it came with, you know, all those pistols that he sold and rifles. He did a, excuse me for going off camera. He did a, almost like a certificate. He called it a certificate of historical origin. And he did that with all the guns and with the smock and with the gloves. And he said that he found that, or he captured, says it captured it in Kaprun, Austria in 1945. And so I think when all those Germans were coming in, you know, from Italy, going back towards Germany and all that, and going up the Autobahn and everything, they started making piles of weapons. And he probably saw that and saw that it was almost mint condition and thought, I'm going to send that home. You know, one of the things that I find very fascinating about Winter's war trophies is, you know, he was up there in rank, and, you know, in I think it was April of 1945, they made everyone sign off on war trophies, because when they were getting into Germany, people were starting to loot stuff like silver and paintings and things like that. So they wanted to make sure war trophies being sent home were signed for by their commanding officer. So you see what's called capture papers sometimes for weapons, and it'll describe the weapon. Well, Winters really didn't have anybody to sign off with. I mean, maybe Sink, but he didn't care. So Winters was able to send a lot of stuff home. And, you know, I've gotten into, like I said, from the time I was in 4th grade, into veterans collections, and, you know, they almost always have Iron Crosses, armbands, Nazi flags, things like that they would have picked up along the way, mostly in German houses, I believe, that they occupied. But with Winters, he sent back stuff that I think, being the thrifty Pennsylvania Dutch guy that he was, that he thought would be valuable then. You know, Iron Crosses weren't worth anything back then. Of course, now they are. But he bought back weapons, binoculars, and things like that. You know, all those pistols. I mean, I've seen a lot of veterans halls of stuff. I've seen 5 or 6 pistols, but I've never seen 25. I mean, that is amazing that he sent that.
Between him and Forrest Goode, because Forrest brought back a crap load of stuff as well, but it must be a Pennsylvania Dutch thing, because Forrest brought back everything, didn't he? They probably cleared out entire German Army Group B or something of weapons, because incredible. And you know, we need to address it at some point. Obviously, your museum is free entry. They have to book an appointment. You're not just open off the street. They have to come. They can come and see it. They can see the collection, and the book. You're putting the documents there so the world can get to see it, because that to me is very important. Because, you know, I know a few collectors, and collectors can be a little bit, it's mine. You can't see it. This is my stuff, and it's also seen as an investment as well. And I'm really grateful that you're sharing it with people via they can actually physically come to your museum and they can read the documents, and indeed Jared's contextual information about where they fit into the war. I think that's very important. And I said I'd ask you this, Eric. What happens should a bolt of lightning come through and you are eradicated off this mortal coil tomorrow? What happens to the collection long term?
Well, hopefully it'll stay together. You know, like I said, we formed a 501c3 not-for-profit charity. So if it's not continued as a museum here, it will go to another not-for-profit. I have some places in mind, but, you know, we want to keep it together, you know, because I've really worked hard to put this stuff together, because it was pretty scattered when I got it. You know, I mean, I did get a big chunk of it at once, but, you know, over the last several years, I put so much more back into it, and you know, got more items and everything. And, you know, I want to try to keep it together. And so something, you know, if it doesn't stay here, it'll go to another equally as good institution, because that's what ultimately Major Winters wanted. I've talked to people who actually knew him, who hung out with him all the time, not people who met him once, not people who think they know him, but people who knew him. And they said that he was worried that he didn't want to, didn't want to take it to this institution or that institution because he's afraid it would end up in a back room somewhere, put away, and no one would ever see it. And that's why I try to exhibit as much of it as I can. Now, of course, you can't exhibit all the documents because there's tens of thousands of them, but the hard artifacts, the guns, the uniforms, the helmets, dog tags, they're out, so people can see them. And I think, according to the people who knew him best, that's what he wanted to see. And that's part of the reason I think, why he distributed the stuff amongst a few different people. That way it wouldn't have all go to one institution. They put out one uniform and then the rest gets put away. That way it's, it's out. And as long as I'm around and I'm in control of it, it's going to be out. And I think that's what he would like to have seen, hopefully.
And the chats on YouTube, Nicholas Patton was saying, that there, and he's absolutely right. There are thousands of officers who got it done and did it right, and we said that at the top of the show, and it's absolutely correct. But what is unusual is this collection of both the physical artifacts, the uniforms, the weapons, and the papers and the letters, and that's what makes it an interesting resource for the future, because there's a gun in a museum that no one knows where it came from, when it got picked up, whether it was ever used. It's just a gun. It's just a piece of metal and wood. But with all this history, with all his notes, that's what makes it the resource. And for you, Jared, as the teacher here, again, bringing you back into it, this is where this is going to become useful, because there's now two generations of people, because I guess Band of Brothers is coming up for 20 years old. So there's now two generations of people who've used it as their entry point to World War II. And so a book of these letters is going to be another tool to connect people with a war that was such a deadly killer. So you must be pleased that there's another means of pupils being able to connect with this subject.
Empathy is such an important part of what we do, because we tend to put our heroes on pedestals. It's a natural inclination to do that. I think, though, by looking at historical documents and sometimes bringing famous people to our level and to understand that, perhaps we've gone through similar struggles in our own lives in one form or another. But in the context of teaching college students on this subject matter, I think letters like these are especially valuable, because it's through those sorts of conversations that they come to the realization that World War II was fought and won by people who were their age. Yeah. And I often use the World War II generation as an example, because all college students go through difficult times. You might have difficulty paying the bills, or there's homesickness. And, I can point to this generation and I can say, we can take comfort and strength from what they did. We can learn from it. You are not alone. People have gone through these sorts of things before. And letters and primary source documents are by far the best way to do that in a classroom environment. And if I may, before we start to wrap things up, I just want to share one quick excerpt that Dick Winters wrote in June of 1945. And I think this sums up his leadership, his demeanor, and his strength in so many ways. This was, about a month after the war in Europe had ended. But of course, there was every expectation that the 101st Airborne Division was going to be deployed to the Pacific. And as our readers will be finding out in our book, Winters actually tried to fast track getting himself to the Pacific. And he wrote to Dieta on June 19th, 1945, and I quote him here. He says, "Maybe I'll get hurt or killed for my trouble, but so what if I can make it possible for many others to go home?" And I think that level of selflessness that he exhibits in this private correspondence of the time goes so far to reinforce what a lot of people already believe in about Dick Winters, but it does so in a very human and emotional perspective. And that's the sort of story that we're trying to bring to life with our book.
Well, I think that's an amazing quote. And I think we need to think, not that we're going into politics and modern life, but we need to be thinking more us, less me. And politics and everything these with COVID and Black Lives Matter and masks and stuff. It's all about me, isn't it? It's all about not about us. We live together. We are a society. We need to live looking after each other. That's fundamentally how World War II was achieved. When all those countries on June the 6th, Britain and Canada and Australia and America, New Zealand and Denmark and all those people, some were democracies, some were republics, some had kings and queens, some didn't, some were but they all just came together because there was a common good. And I think Dick Winters, to me, represents a man who didn't really want to be in combat, but was going to go there and do the best he could and get the job done and keep on doing that job so that other people didn't have to. It's simple as that. Yeah, anything else you want to, I mean, just briefly, Erik, before we wrap things up, your museum, you said earlier, it's not just World War II. You've got things from presidents and Civil War, and just give us 5 top items that aren't World War II. Don't have to go and get them or anything, but things that people will be fascinated to see when they come to your museum.
On World War II, that is?
Well, no, anything at all. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll just grab a couple here. Let's see. Well, we have General Warren's hat. He was one of the heroes of Little Round Top here in Gettysburg. That's a great Civil War piece. We have Abraham Lincoln's wallet. His actual wallet that was saved has his name on it. Really good provenance on that and who owned it over the years. And that's an amazing item. We have a piece of the couch with Adolf Hitler's blood on it where he was killed. We actually have Hitler's DNA here, and it's, to me, that's one of the most fascinating World War II relics, because it really is the symbol of, the end of the war in Europe, and the death of Hitler. And that's a really amazing piece, we have John F. Kennedy's suit, with lots of photos of him wearing it. And, like I said, the Gettysburg Museum of History is a history museum, but we try to tie it in with Gettysburg history somewhat. I mean, World War II, they used our battlefield as a POW camp in World War II. They also used our battlefield as the World War I training camp for the U.S. Tank Corps that was commanded by then Captain Dwight D. Eisenhower. And of course, Dwight D. Eisenhower moved back here after his presidency and retired here. So he lived here, and almost every president after Lincoln visited here. So we have a big connection with U.S. presidents at Gettysburg. So we kind of tie in all those items with Gettysburg as best we can. Of course, all the men from Pennsylvania that fought, we have a lot of Pennsylvania men's items here from World War I and World War II. So there's a few things that might get you to come to the museum.
And something Elvis. Haven't you got something Elvis Presley? Haven't you got, or did you?
Well, we had an Elvis Presley exhibit a few years ago, and we rotated that out to make room for the Dick Winters collection.
Well, that's a good excuse. I'll let you off on that one, But
but right now Elvis has left the building. He's not.
I see what you did there. So that's and maybe that's got time to wrap things up, because it's just another storm has started here in Normandy. So I don't know how long I have an internet connection for anyway. Because if I suddenly cut out, I did the.
Paul, can I do a little plug?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. You can plug whatever you want. Yeah.
I want to encourage everyone who's watching this to support World War II TV. What Paul's doing here is an amazing thing. And when he started doing it right away, I got on board. And, you can sign up with monthly payments. That's what I do. I want to continue to support Paul, and I hope everyone else does too. I really appreciate what you're doing here.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, like you, Erik, it's important to me that this stuff is available free. I mean, okay, your book will cost money, but the museum, people can go and see it free. And you have Facebook pages, you share photos of your collection all the time. People they can get access to this history. You tell stories on your page. Jared, you teach people, you do living history interpretation. We're all part of a network of people who give this information freely, as well as try and make a living from it to pay the mortgage and what have you. So well, I've thoroughly enjoyed tonight's show. It was really good. I knew it would be good. It's talking to friends. It can't go wrong, really. I will have to remind me, Erik, I will put you in touch with Luke Daly Groves, who's the historian who wrote the book, basically squashing all the rumors of Hitler going to Argentina and stuff, because he might like to come and have a look at your couch or piece of couch, because he spends a lot of time on Twitter telling people he didn't go to Argentina.
Well, I do too, because we post that artifact all the time, and people start with that kind of stuff because of shows like Hunting Hitler and some of these other books. It's become crazy at this point, in my opinion.
Exactly, that's that conspiracy itself. I mean, I've been told people I should be titling my videos things like secret Nazi mystery conspiracy, let's solve that. So I'm just telling history. So, but you'd get more views. I said, yeah, but I don't want to just appear to be some schmuck who's trying to selling something. What I'm doing is getting people on who want to talk about history. The story is the story. So people are asking, when is the book out? It's about it's pre-order now. 2 or 3 people have ordered it while we're talking, so you've got some royalties coming. It's
October 27th.
So say that again.
October 27th is the official release date.
Superb. So I will add, I think I've already put this details in the description on YouTube, but some people have asked for information about Erik's museum. I think I did it anyway. If I haven't, I'll check that. And Jared, you've got a blog and things you run. I'll make sure people can get in touch with you. Erik has got a Gettysburg Museum of History Facebook page you can go and access, and a website. So there's lots of ways of keeping in touch with these guys. So I think we've done a good job of telling what's in the book without actually giving away all the special stuff. It's been a privilege to see the displays of equipment you've got there, Erik, and I'm sure we could come back and do another show sometime in the future about some of your other World War II relics. Jared, you were on my June the 6th show. You're always fantastic and very eloquent and very passionate, and that's what people want. So,
Thank you.
Martin Harley did just say, Erik, how was the couch saved? How did that bit of couch end up?
So there's some famous pictures that were taken by Life magazine of some American soldiers down there, and when those pictures were taken, a colonel who was part of Eisenhower's staff went down there, and he just cut a piece off, and I mean, it's about so big. And if you go on my website or on my Facebook page, there's pictures of it, and it's stained with Hitler's blood, and I mean, it's been tested. It's definitely blood, and we've done a lot of science on it, and there's going to be more about that coming up soon. We're working on a big project with that, actually.
Well, don't forget, we're always here for when you've got new sensational stuff to reveal. We're here as an audience for you. So, and Jared, when your dispatches from D-Day book is worth reading, I've got a copy, and yeah, again, there's links below. You can find this stuff there. So, in terms of housekeeping, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. The links are there below. Make sure you click the little bell so you get the notifications. If you would like to help us on Patreon, that would be most appreciated. Our next show, we've got a bit of a gap now. We're trying to take a little bit of a break because we've been doing crazy amounts of prep recently. We've got our 3 shows coming up on August 22nd from the Falaise Gap. We did our recce a couple of days ago. And then we're going to start doing more shows. I've got some things planned in September in the Netherlands. We might do some stuff in Bastogne in December. Obviously, we don't have evenings for daylight and stuff, but basically, we're going to keep on going. As long as we can find people who want to talk about stuff, we're going to keep on doing shows because we enjoy doing it. So, thank you, Erik. Thank you, Jared. You've lived up to your reputations as being very passionate about your subject. People have enjoyed the show. So,
thank you.
Thank you for coming along. Paul. Well, this is it. I will end the stream then. So thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Paul Woodadge from World War II TV. So this has been a fascinating look. Don't forget to order that book now, and keep an eye out on Erik's website for these limited edition ones with Brad Freeman's signature, because Brad's an amazing guy. I've met Brad thanks to Erik. Had a couple of meals in restaurant. One of those soft-spoken, unsung heroes who's one of those guys you meet and you just go, I won't forget that. So there we go. Thanks very much, gentlemen. I'm ending it. Good night. Right. So the stream has ended now. It's just us now. Although some